Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show for you tonight. Anthony Taylor, a longtime medical and recreational marijuana activist here in Oregon. I've known him about 40 years. He is our guest. He has an organization called Compassionate Oregon that's lobbying for medical marijuana patients in the Oregon legislature that we support. He'll be our guest tonight. But first, as always, we will bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, if you or a loved one are looking for help finding a doctor to qualify for medical marijuana, call our office. We have doctor referrals immediately available all across the United States. Call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. And without further ado, we'll get on with our interview with Anthony Taylor. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Anthony Taylor. Anthony, it is great to have you back on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I don't know how many times you've been on the show over the years. We've been doing this show for the record since 1996. So 28 years. I think this is show 1183 or 84. But you have been lobbying for marijuana law reform in Oregon since I moved here in 1984. I remember back then I was impressed that you were doing an internship at Portland State University with the state legislature while you were lobbying the legislature in favor of cannabis reform. Back then, we had marijuana legalization petitions that we put on the ballot. We ended up losing overwhelmingly in 1986. That's just a little bit of background, though. You want to tell us about your current work and your current organization?
Sure. Well, back in 2012, I was in Southern Oregon, and I was encouraged by friends down there to get back into the legislature and see what I could do to help patients out. And so in excuse me, prior to the 2013 legislative session, I met with my senator, my state senator, who at the time was Brian Boquist, and he was Army Special Forces back in the day, so he was a veteran like myself. And I asked him to introduce a bill to add PTSD to the list of qualifying conditions to get your medical card here in Oregon, and he agreed and helped me get it through all the process and all that sort of stuff. And the governor signed the bill, and we added PTSD to the list of debilitating conditions. It's now the fourth most requested, or the fourth most condition listed for getting a card.
Yeah.
And severe pain has actually fallen out of the top slot now for neurological conditions. So lots of people with Lyme's disease, fibromyalgia, those kinds of things that are getting, cannabis to help treat those conditions. So it's been interesting. On the other hand, the program is down to about 24,000 people overall, including patients, caregivers, and growers. And we've seen a dramatic, over 95% decrease in the number of growers growing for multiple patients. Once the tracking requirements came in for those growing for 3 or more patients, it really decimated the program. It was just too costly and too rigorous reporting requirements, so most people just dropped out.
I can't afford it. I would grow for more people, but I can't afford to opt into the metric system for $500. I can't
Yep.
afford to spend hours reporting relatively in you know small amounts of cannabis transfers to my
Yep.
patients,
Yep.
and subject to search and seizure and public rebuke.
Yep.
So I just can't afford it. I had grown for over 100 patients at times, and it cost me a lot of money to do it, but my clinic business supported that, and
Sure.
I was able to grow enough not only to give to those 100 patients, but to give to a lot of other people, and make clones for a lot of other people. But
Sure.
can't afford to do that anymore, and it's rare for patients to have a grower these days.
It is very rare. I know that Anthony Johnson and Sarah Duff have got their growers list put together, and I've actually talked to a couple of people lately that have found growers through their help. So that's good, but that $500 to just to report and the burden that it places on you for all the hours you got to spend reporting and buying tags, and if you're growing 48 plants, your tags are shipping for your tags is going to cost you more than the tags themselves. So and then you have to have a state certified scale, and it has to be recertified every year, and OLCC will come on your property and inspect to make sure you're doing your metric reporting properly. And it just chased a lot of people out. Originally, in 2018, when this took effect, we had, in 2017, when they passed legislation to do it, we had 4,200 grow sites with 3 or more patients serving over 22,000 patients with no-cost cannabis. And now we're down to about 170 grow sites with 3 or more patients. And God bless them, they're still hanging in there. And so the other side of that is the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program did not meet their administrative costs for the last biennium. They fell short by about $750,000 and projected to fall short about twice that, maybe a little bit more for the next biennium. So I've been meeting with legislators to try and get that addressed, and Senator Przansky, always a champion for cannabis, has asked me to put together something to address some of the issues around OMMP and what we might do to make sure that the budget, there's not a shortfall anymore. And there's an omnibus bill being drafted that actually pulls about $2 million out of the cannabis tax revenue to meet that shortfall. So we'll see how that goes.
What should be. That's the way it should be, is that
Absolutely.
the recreational market should help medical patients. There's no doubt.
It should be funding the whole $8 million budget.
Yeah.
That's what it should be doing.
The fee for
But
patients is prohibitive. $200 a year is
the highest in the country.
for most people.
Yeah.
Most of our patients receive some sort of public benefit, and because of that $200 fee is reduced. But
Sure.
it's still $60 or $50 for veterans like you and I. It's $20 unless you have more disability than 50%.
Exactly. So there's 6 states in this country right now. The Oregon Cannabis Commission, which I now chair, sent a letter to the governor a year ago outlining some of the issues that need to be addressed in the OMMP and some of the added protections we could include in it, which will be part of our bill request. Added protections. So there's 15 states right now that prohibit discrimination against medical cannabis patients in employment, housing, and education. So there's a number of things we could do to improve our program. But as far as fixing it, I'm not sure how we get there. And then the other aspect of the program is there's no clear path from the OMMP to a comprehensive and compassionate approach to cannabis use in Oregon's medical care sector. And so we're reviewing that as well. Our bill will be to review and evaluate the benefits of the Oregon medical marijuana program for people, Oregonians with debilitating conditions, and see where that takes us. So my board and I and some other stakeholders have been discussing just what that'll look like. So we're hopeful that that will get introduced as pre-session filing, and I'm meeting with legislators during Ledge Days in 2 weeks. And the other thing that we're working on, Compassionate Oregon, is an Oregon version of Ryan's Law, which permits the use of cannabis in hospice patients in licensed healthcare facilities. We've got I'm actually working on the Legislative Council request for that bill right now, so we'll get that in probably next week, and so that'll be in ahead of the deadline, and we'll be able to get that pre-session filed, and we've gotten a promise that we will get a hearing on the bill. So we're working on that, but it all takes money, and so we've launched a fundraising effort, and you just go to compassionateoregon.org, all one word, all lowercase, hit the donate button and drop some cash into our account. What we're asking is that those that want to donate and contribute to our effort do a sustaining membership, a monthly membership of $4.20 or whatever they feel like, and do that for a year and help us raise some money to keep doing our work, because I was sitting on an industry meeting earlier this week, and they've got about $100,000 to spend on this election cycle and this legislative session. So we've got about $200 in the bank. So we really need to bump that up and get up into the thousands so that we can do, printing and getting stuff to legislators and working on our video clips that we're sending out. We've updated our webpage at compassionateoregon.org. So it's more informational, more helpful. We're keeping everybody updated on the news and the DEA rescheduling process and some of the studies and stuff that relate to hospice and palliative care, the use of cannabis in those sectors. And so we're just really getting ready for 2025. So any contributions folks can make at compassionateoregon.org, it will really help benefit our efforts.
All right. I encourage our viewers to help fund this. I know you're not making money on this. You are, in fact, donating not just your time, but your money as well to make it work for gas and all sorts of things. And so for it to be
gas,
more
gas, parking, and ink for the printers. Yeah, and I do it all pro bono. I do have my own reasons for doing it. We're all getting older, and should I end up being in an assisted living facility, I certainly want to be able to use my cannabis while there. And although the great work that Clifford Spencer has done over the years, it's still a battle, primarily because it's still a Schedule I controlled substance. But with rescheduling on the horizon, the public comment period for written expired July 22nd. The public comment for actual verbal comment is December 2nd. And if you go to the DEA.org, you can find, or to our website, you can find the information on how to register to provide public comment. You have to register, and then, you go to the public forum when it's time and put in your 3 or 4 cents worth. And I encourage people, if they do decide to make public comment, live public comment, is to stay focused on the point that they're trying to do, which is rescheduling. And because I read through a lot of those 30,000 plus comments that were submitted in writing to the DEA, and a lot of them were just like, oh, it should be descheduled, not rescheduled, and kind of going off on, it's been 40 years and ... rather than, really cogently addressing the issue of rescheduling and the impact it might have on Oregon's medical cannabis program. So you can find that on our website as well, but certainly go to compassionateoregon.org and make a donation for us.
It seems that what I like to call the forces of darkness, the anti-cannabis groups out there, are going to challenge that in court if it ever gets to that point. it's becoming less and less likely that that's going to go through. Like so many other things over the past few years, we've seen the MORE Act that would actually expunge federal criminal records and uh, allow complete descheduling. That passed the United States House of Representatives twice in 2014 and 16, but it never got taken up by the Senate. And so there's been a lot of false hope out there. And so, but I agree, if you're going to comment, you should say how Schedule 3 is going to help change things. It's no matter how much most of us would prefer it to be completely descheduled.
Sure. Yeah, and it's a good step forward if they do reschedule, but it'll be the last time they ever talk about cannabis in the schedule, because it's just like, well, we reschedule it for you. What else do you want? Well, we want it descheduled, right? But that conversation is a long ways off, a long ways off. And I don't see a change in administration affecting it much. I think that the current administration, and should the current VP assume the presidency in November, I think they'll continue on this path. It remains to be seen how they would, continue, or if they continued under a Trump administration. So fingers crossed all the way around, because it really, rescheduling isn't going to do much for the industry. It's not going to give them safe banking. It's not going to give them, access to bankruptcy protection. It's not going to do any of that for the industry, but it will have an impact on the medical side of the equation, which is the most important side of the equation, in my opinion. I think it will help expand the Cannabis Research Act that President Biden signed into law a couple of years ago. I think it will help that, although that Research Act wasn't all it was cracked up to be, because the DEA is still involved. You still have to deal with the DEA. If you want to be a research cannabis grower, you still have to get approved by the DEA. And so I'm not sure anybody's even applied for one yet, because there has to be certain conditions before anybody can even apply to be a research grower. So it hasn't had much of an effect, but rescheduling to Schedule 3, I think, will kick it into gear, because then you can talk about funding, you can talk about how you're going to get it into pharmacies, you can talk about what you need to do to put it in an edible, THC or CBD in an edible. And I just don't think it's going to be too soon. I don't think it's going to be soon if they do the rescheduling where we hear anything really from the feds. We're still waiting on them for rules for CBD in edibles. So the process is, once the double public comment written and oral public comment are done, then the DEA makes their decision. If they decide to reschedule, change the rule, then it goes before Congress, and then the president has to sign off on it. So it's a process, and since the oral comments aren't going to happen until the first part of December, it's not likely we'll see it rescheduled anytime soon, if at all. So hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah, that would make a big difference. Let's talk a little bit about the situation that was bad with the Oregon Board of Nursing and is now changed to where the Oregon Board of Nursing, along with the national ANA, have certified cannabis medical practice for nurses, RNs, and nurse practitioners.
Yeah, that's really good news. In 2021, maybe it was 23, 21, I think it was, when we added to the list of those healthcare professionals that could sign an APS, added physician assistants, naturopaths, nurses, that sort of thing. We also put some protection in there for nurses so that they could have a conversation without fear of retribution from their licensing board about cannabis with their patients. But Ryan's Law, if we get that adopted, that will really help ensure that everyone is protected for I mean, we're already protected under statute. All healthcare professionals are protected in recommending cannabis, in administering cannabis, and in using medical cannabis themselves. They're all protected from civil penalties or other um, prosecutions from their medical boards. And so I am, as many folks are, befuddled by the fact that the Oregon Medical Board is still going after physicians for making recommendations to cannabis. And quite often they fall back on the fact that the doctor isn't following the rules, which the OMB has never put in place. So there's no rules to follow. The last time we had any prescribing guidelines or recommendation guidelines was 2014, so that's 10 years ago. So the physicians are doing the best they can with what they have. They get jammed up for not including the pediatrician in the conversation about giving cannabis to a minor child, without recognizing the fact that the pressure they put on these physicians impacts their willingness to sign a card for a minor child. So we've gone from over 250 children in Oregon with medical cards down to about, I think we're at about 90 now. And it's really all because the licensing boards are being so harassing to the licensed healthcare professionals that, recommend the benefits of cannabis for a debilitating condition.
So, that was happening to nurses. And now, with change in the management and the nursing board recognizing the medical efficacy and safety of cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, they aren't doing that anymore, but the medical board has gone after several doctors and delicensed them for helping pediatric patients. And the Oregon Medical Board cites the American Board of Pediatricians, which says that kids shouldn't have medical marijuana. But we don't talk about the treatment and the alternative treatments that these kids are getting. They've gone after patients with autism spectrum disorder or autism.
Yep.
And we've seen several doctors lose their license over this. And it wasn't because anyone complained about that doctor. It was because the medical board decided to investigate. And I guess another doctor who used to work with me just lost his license this week for the same thing, for helping pediatric patients. But again, they don't hang it on medical marijuana. They hang it on insufficient charting and going against the recommendations of the American Board of Pediatricians. So I work with a doctor now that requires a referral from the patient, the minor patient's current doctors. And I've been communicating with one pediatrician who won't do it, but very respectful. I sent her the hour-long documentary Weed from CNN, where Dr. Sanjay Gupta, a practicing neurosurgeon and neurologist, talks about cannabis and autism. And I also sent her 25 medical journal articles from the 2020s, recent medical journal articles talking about cannabis. And she's still not comfortable issuing a referral for her patient. And my current doctor, given the witch hunt by the Oregon Medical Board, is reticent to sign for any minor that doesn't have a referral from their own physician.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that is actually in 2014, it was part of the recommending guidelines for cannabis, is that, you get a referral from the primary care physician and your pediatrician. But again, it's such a conundrum because there are 2 FDA approved drugs for minor children, cannabis drugs for minor children for seizures. And, but yet when you want to go plant medicine, it's a crapshoot as to whether or not, you're going to find a physician that will sign a card for a patient, or even one that would even consider it because of, the blowback they get from the Oregon Medical Board. So, in fact, one of the doctors, I have a file of 5 doctors now that have had to go through this and have all had to face the decision of continuing to practice, but only if they stop making recommendations for minor children for cannabis. And it's unconscionable. And one of the physicians, they started the investigation because they found the physician to be in possession of a small amount of cannabis, which the physician was using for pain management. And when I had a conversation with the physician, I said, you're protected in your own personal use of medical cannabis by statute. He goes, what? He didn't know. And so when we started talking about allowing the use of cannabis in assisted living facilities, then Representative Pruzak, now director of the Oregon State Board of Nursing, was totally unaware of the statutes. Why didn't I know about this? Because nobody's talking about it, because none of the facilities want to deal with it. They're afraid that, 1, it's a Schedule I controlled substance, and 2, that their Medicare reimbursements would be affected. And in California, under the Ryan's Law, they eliminated that argument by reaching out to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And they replied that we do not have any rules about cannabis, and we would not reimburse because somebody was using cannabis in their end-of-life care and their hospice care. So that took that argument off the table, and the California bill also took the argument about it being illegal federally off the table by just prohibiting it in the statute. You can't use that excuse anymore. This is helping people. It's a quality of life issue. It's not a cannabis issue. And so right now, like I said, I'm drafting a legislative request for it to get it in and get it introduced as pre-session. We've had a promise that we'll get a hearing on it. And we'll just see if we're strong enough in our presentations to warrant a work session to get it out of the committee and onto the floor, and keep moving it onto the governor's desk if we can get it there. So that's what we need more money for. CompassionateOregon.org. Hit the donate button.
All right. You want to talk a little bit about your past? I know when I first met you, we were both working on full marijuana legalization. There's that classic picture out there that I think Louis took of you and I at the desk turning in the signatures on November 1st, 1985 to qualify what became ballot measure 5. It was the second time any place in the United States voted to legalize marijuana in November of 86. It's still the earliest initiative in terms of a state. Whoop, we lost him. We had a little glitch there, but we're back now. So let's go back into history here. We definitely want people to support Compassionate Oregon and our lobbying effort with our state legislators to make Oregon's medical marijuana law better. Because right now, doctors are losing their license, even though the law says they should not. And that they don't have to be full active physicians. They're just referred to for medical marijuana. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. They are protected in recommendations for qualifying for the state issued card, and they are protected in administering it in a licensed healthcare facility, and they are protected in their own use of medical cannabis.
Dr. Lay actually worked for me when he had that issue in the Dows back then. It's odd that a lot of these, I think the majority of these doctors have worked with our Hemp and Cannabis Foundation and setting up. So recently, just this week, Dr. Hedman lost his license because he helped pediatric patients. Dr. David Knox had to give up his license because he was helping pediatric patients. And they censored the former head of the commission that you now head. You head the Oregon Medical Cannabis Commission. Is that the proper title?
Yeah, the Oregon Cannabis Commission, yes.
And that's appointed by the governor, right?
That's correct.
So a former head of that same commission is Dr. David Knox's daughter, Dr. Rachel Knox, correct?
Correct.
So the medical board would not allow her to see medical marijuana patients, even though she worked for the Oregon Health Authority and the medical marijuana program. They told her she would have to be supervised for a year. She's a Harvard graduate, and she has a master's degree and an MD degree. She's a medical doctor and a master's of business administration. So it's amazing that she was going to start working with our clinic, and she couldn't because of the medical board. She was afraid if she kept pushing her change of her license back to an active license instead of an administrative one, that she would lose that license, and then she'd have to report it to California, where her license is in good standing. So she didn't want to ruin her record, and so they've censored all these doctors, and even though the law says they can't do what they're doing, that medical marijuana recommending doctors don't have to meet, they have to simply certify the patient has that condition, that as a qualifying condition. They don't have to provide any other form of medical care. And so the medical board for doctors and DOs, which is different from the nursing board, as we discussed earlier, and different from the board for naturopathic physicians, fortunately, as well. But they are going after doctors who help pediatric patients with medical marijuana.
It does appear to be the case. And at all of their initial, I don't know if you call it an indictment, but they issue a document saying why they're doing what they're doing and citing all the violations. And those are not public record, but the filing against the doctor's license is public record, so we can see that. But in reading some of those documents, their initial filings against the doctors, it's just really absurd. The lengths they go to cite issues like the doctors not following the proper procedures or not keeping the proper record. They're trying to bring them down on technicalities and saying, well, because you're not following these protocols, we can't let you do this anymore. And it's often it's not instigated. The investigation is not instigated by a patient complaint. It's for instance, with both the Knoxes, they had some issues in Washington and they resolved those issues, but it bled into the Oregon Medical Board, and they started.
And I went through a hostile corporate takeover, as we've discussed on this show in the past when it was going on, and the people who took it over did not follow the new law. These laws change. And so the law in Washington changed, saying that you can only see medical marijuana patients in your own office. You can't go to a hotel conference room or a temporary office. So the Canadians that took over the business, they kept the Dr. Knox, Rachel, and David going to those facilities, and a competitor in Spokane complained. And they just basically, the Washington Medical Board just slapped them on the wrist because of that. But they had to tell the Oregon Medical Board about that, and that launched investigations by the Oregon Medical Board. So it really wasn't for anything. No patient had ever complained.
No, it was unintended consequences and collateral damage. And I don't know what we're going to do. I was just speaking with an attorney here earlier this week about exploring some writs of mandamus to try and we've discussed this before, but
I'm thinking,
For instance, one of the issues that is still, I think, an issue is if you're in the mental health field and if you're applying for like an OHA-sponsored clinical setting educational program, you are drug tested. You have to provide a urine sample and they screen for THC. Well, the statute requires that cannabis must be treated as any other medicine. So if it's any other medicine, why are we screening for it? Right? And so, and if you do test positive for THC because it's a legal substance, why are we still jamming up, especially the mental health care providers in that field? And what the OHA did was when Reagan passed the first Drug-Free Workplace Act, there wasn't any requirements for testing, as you well know, but the testing industry was already growing rapidly. And so it just became a de facto policy by just about everyone. Every employee was starting to drug test, and many times for no cause. Um, so there was that battle, but then they passed, I think it was under George H.W. Bush, they passed the Safety Sensitive Drug-Free Act, and that requires like pilots and train engineers and, you know, some of these heavy equipment operators that they have to be drug tested under federal statute. And the OHA rolled their mental health provider sector into that category. They are considered safety sensitive employees, when in fact they're not, not according to the definition, but that's where the OHA put them. So now they screen for cannabis. And it just seems like it's time for the courts to step in and tell them to follow the rules, follow the statutes. And that conversation, of course, is blossoming into, you know, how we deal with the Oregon Medical Board as well. Because they are not allowed by statute to do any civil penalties or any other kinds of discipline to these people making recommendations for cannabis. It's in statute.
That's what a writ of mandamus was made for. It's
Yep.
to tell a government official to follow the law. And I'm sure you recall the writ of mandamus that we successfully took to the Oregon Supreme Court back in 1984, when the Secretary of State wrongfully disqualified a number of marijuana legalization signatures.
Exactly.
And Norma Paulus, who was the Secretary of State at the time, was ordered in a writ of mandamus to count the signatures that were valid voter signatures to follow the law. So when Dr. Knox, David Knox, was facing, you know, the Oregon Medical Board over this, I advocated that we get a lawyer to file a writ of mandamus. But I talked to a couple, didn't seem to have any. Most lawyers are unfamiliar with this particular act, the writ of mandamus, and so it was difficult in the short run to get anyone interested in doing that to help save, you know, Dr. David Knox's license. I hope we have them on there. I've talked to David and Rachel about doing a show with the doctors to address this issue. David wrote a great response.
I've read that. It is wonderful.
Yeah. And
yeah,
so
absolutely wonderful. In fact, I have it in the file. Like I was mentioning before, I've got, I think, 6 doctors now that have had to go through this.
Yeah.
And I've got those in a file, and I have forwarded those to Senator Przansky, and I have a meeting with him here in just a couple of weeks, and I'm gonna get that back on his radar, because with Dr. Hedman being in the same situation now, it hasn't gone away, and it needs to. And it was interesting because Senator Przansky's office reached out to the Oregon Medical Board, and they replied that no, we don't do this. And to prove that they didn't do it, they supplied a copy of the documents showing that they had actually done it to a doctor. So they're kind of speaking out
I
of,
think hat on what the American Board of Pediatricians says you're violating the recommendation of the American Board of Pediatricians, which says we shouldn't give medical marijuana to pediatric patients. But the alternatives are so much worse. I mean, we see these ads for pharmaceuticals, these monomolecular mercantile madness pharmaceuticals out there, to steal the phrase from the late great Dr. Todd McCorea. But we see these ads, and they half the time they say this may cause death. Well, cannabis has never killed anyone,
that's right.
and the safety and efficacy of cannabis is unsurpassed. And the thing is, these other doctors, even the medical board, they don't know about the endocannabinoid system. If they understood the endocannabinoid system, they would have some insight into what they're doing. The other thing that the medical board has hung their hat on in, de-licensing valid, compassionate, good doctors is charting. They say,
Starting.
oh, you aren't charting sufficiently, you aren't writing enough notes, and you aren't questioning about their condition. I know in one case they said that the weight of a pediatric patient hadn't changed from one year to the next. But another recent guest and associate of yours and mine, Jana Champagne, says she knows several autistic patients whose weight don't change in any specific year. But that's not the standard that they are going. They're not supposed to chart everything in the patient's condition. They're only supposed to look and see if they have one of the qualifying conditions from the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act. And if they do, then that's it. They don't have to do all the, but the medical board doesn't read the law. And I hope Senator Przansky does something, or you and I and these doctors can get some court action to recompense these doctors for the pain and suffering that they have suffered.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Dr. Christian Lay, he said he spent over $15,000, and that same kind of number was facing Dr. David Knox as he was trying to determine if he was going to go ahead and fight it also. And the other thing I noticed in reading through those is they keep referring back to the dangers of these pediatric children, minor children using cannabis when their brain hasn't fully matured to 25 at the age of 25 years, right? And the damage that cannabis might have on that developing brain,
Yeah.
disregarding the side effects that many of
I,
these seizure drugs have on children.
I
And
started smoking marijuana when I was 11, and I bought my first pound of Mexican marijuana in Dallas, Texas when I was 13. And so then the people who sold it to me could have been put in jail longer for giving me marijuana than if they had killed me. But in the 70s, it was a completely different culture that is hard to fully understand today. But I don't think it has damaged my brain. I mean, I'm still a Mensa member. I won't tout any more of my benefits. So,
yeah,
but you and I both worked on that marijuana initiative we referred to earlier in 1985, where we qualified for a vote in 1986. We have that great photo of you and I and Jack Herer in the background inside the Secretary of State's office in the Capitol turning in signatures.
that's
Left
right.
pocket.
And we, because of the kerfluffle that came up around the 1984 signatures, we gathered more than enough signatures to qualify in record time because we were turning those signatures in 1985, and the qualifying deadline was July of 86,
It's
right?
still the earliest for any initiative to ever make the ballot. I started the petition drive in July in Medford, and a lot of people signed that petition saying, I'm going to vote against this, but you were cheated the last time
That's right.
because of what with Norma Paulus, because the Supreme Court ordered Norma Paulus to put it on the ballot in 1984. So she did for one day. And then the next day, she took it off again in a news conference saying that there were some fake signatures in there. and that was irrelevant. But at that point, it was too late to go back to the court. You know,
Yeah, exactly. So,
Laura
uh,
Collins was never elected to state office again after that, even though she tried to become governor. And uh, you know, we made the ballot the following year.
yeah, 26, almost 27% of the vote. And yeah, that was a great year. And, you know, it really is interesting because back in those days, we were really the only game in town, really across the country at the time. We were the only ones. California had done it a couple of years earlier, but we were the only ones in the country that were trying to do this. And we were really taking a big bite of the apple, trying to make it legal for anyone 18 and older. Right? And it was one simple sentence. It wasn't 14, 15, 20 pages like Measure 91 was, trying to satisfy everybody's little, you know, um, idiosyncrasies on what they wanted to see in the, and satisfying, you know, meeting the needs of law enforcement and education and all that, all those buckets they created, meanwhile leaving the medical program unfunded, except for the fees. But now, trying to get a word in edgewise about medical cannabis in the state legislators, it's really tough. Our bandwidth is diminished to almost zero, and most of the building considers medical marijuana just another brand. Oh, you use medical marijuana? Well, do you get that at the store? Well, I would if I could, you know. But for the most part, there's not, most of the flower is at least 90 days after harvest. You can't get any of the patient limit packaging for, you know, you can't get a 4,000 milligram bottle of tincture or a cartridge with 4,000 milligrams of THC in it. You can't get any of that stuff. Typically, you can't find any suppositories. The transdermal patches are a thing of the past almost. And so to go to a store and try and find what the patient needs, if you're looking for much more than flower, you're not going to find really potencies or the amounts of THC in a package that will both meet your needs and meet your budget. Now, I remember when, you know, the 1 gram syringe of RSO was $60. Now you can get one for $20, $25. But still,
That's only for medical patients.
yeah. And so still, if you're using a gram a day and you have to pay $20 a day, that's what, $600 a month, $6,000 a month, whatever it is. It's beyond the budgetary capabilities of most patients. 37% of all of our patients are qualified for the Oregon Health Plan. So they get a reduced card. But the other people that qualify under SNAP and SSI, veterans, most of these folks are low income. And so trying to support, you know, a $600 medical expense at a dispensary every month is beyond their means. And if they're sufficiently disabled, they can't produce their own. And the designated grower program, part of the medical program, has been devastated terribly. And so, thank God for people like Anthony Johnson and Sarah Duff, who, you know, have a list of growers that still taking patients, but it's just become too burdensome for people to really get in and dig their heels in growing for cannabis. One of the things that the Compassionate Oregon has been considering is breaking up OMMP and leaving the cards with the OHA/OHP, and no longer requiring a medical patient to register their grow site, their address as a grow site, just because they're growing 6 plants rather than 4 plants, what they don't have to register, right? And then the biggest issue is what you do with the legacy and the multiple patient growers. So there's been talk about whether we move them into the Oregon Department of Ag under the hemp program, and that oversight, or if we push them into the OLCC as researchers. And either way, whichever way you push them so that OHA never has to worry about cultivation supervision or oversight anymore, they have to go in place. They have to go under existing rules for at least 2 years and maybe 3. But, you know, because the OHA OMMP is suffering budget problems because they don't have enough participants to meet their administrative costs. And so maybe it is time for a change. Maybe it is time for a little breaking up of the monopoly, so to speak.
The cost that the patients have to pay is incredibly high. I mean,
Absolutely.
$200, you don't have the Oregon Health Plan, SNAP, supplemental security income from the federal government, special program, or you're a military veteran, your fee is $200 a year. And that's prohibitive for most people.
Minnesota has a $200 annual card fee as well, and those are the 2 highest cards in the country. Most of them, there's 6 or 7 states that have no fee at all, and there's about most of the rest of them are in the $25 to $75 range for cards.
And Michigan, those states are in that range. Definitely.
Yeah. But what really is confounding for, I remember before Compassionate Oregon managed to get the veterans fees down to $20, and it's the only fee set by statute, by the way. The rest are set by rule, so the OHA can change it at any time, but can't right now because they're stuck. They can't lower the fees because that means even less money coming in. They can't raise their fees because that'll mean less money coming in too, because nobody will register. So back before we got the change to veterans fees down to $20, it was costing me $200 for my card, about $150 to get my card signed because I was with veterans, so they couldn't sign the card even if they wanted to. And then I was growing remotely, not at my own address. That was another $200. So every year I was paying $550 a year for the privilege of being a medical marijuana patient in this state and the protections it offers. Today, it offers some protections. It offers protection under the federal amendment from federal dollars being spent to harass medical patients or any part of that community. We get tax-free purchases in the Oregon stores. We get higher plant counts and higher possession limits, and we have the opportunity to get higher packaging limits, meaning we can get 4,000 milligrams of THC in a package versus 1,000, which is what the adult use is limited to. So, you know, there are some benefits to the program, but
travel. If you go to Hawaii, an Oregon card will allow you to get a Hawaii card, and they don't have recreational in Hawaii, but
right.
You have an Oregon card, you can get a tourist card in Hawaii and go to their dispensaries.
That's correct. And we have been advocating that they do that in Oregon as well. Oh, it's too complicated. No, every store just has a list of a copy of all the cards out there, medical cards. There's like, what is there, 35, 39 medical programs in this country now? You just have a list. It's like having the bad check list back when we were kids if you were bouncing checks, right? If your name was on that list, you couldn't get a check. You couldn't pay with a check. This is one of the frustrating things about advocating for cannabis patients and the medical use of cannabis is dealing with those issues, dealing with trying to make it be treated as any other medicine. And it's just been a battle. And since legalization, it's gotten harder because our bandwidth has disappeared. And as I said, everybody just thinks of it as a brand. And if you want it, go to the store and get it. So it's tough. Go ahead.
Oregon.org is the way to reach you, right?
CompassionateOregon.org. That's correct.
Yeah. And so you're trying to raise funds to be able to lobby as a citizen, volunteer lobbyist. There are a lot of expenses involved, and I really appreciate you doing that. I know we played here on this show the program that you put on back on April 20th at Chinook Winds Casino as well. That was very entertaining. First time something like that's been done in an Oregon Native American facility.
Yep, that's right. And they were happy to do it. I really appreciate, was it Barry Kissinger, I think, or Kessinger, something like that. He was a account executive that managed it all and put it all together for us, and really appreciate his help. And Barry Height helped down there as well. We got articles in the paper, and yeah, it was a great event, and I look forward to putting on another one. And doing what we can to keep getting the word out. Right now, as you mentioned, we are doing our fundraising campaign. So if you go to Compassionate Oregon, all one word, all lowercase, .org, and go to our donation page, you just hit the donate button right on the front page, and it'll take you there, and you just make your contribution.
Okay, Anthony, is there anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Just keep the faith. Rescheduling on the horizon. If that comes through, things will get better for patients, I believe. And I just want everybody to keep the faith. Make sure you support our efforts of what we're doing in the legislature in 2025. And we'll keep fighting.
Now, while they're running for office, and make certain that they're going to support medical marijuana laws and lowering the cost for patients and keeping it funded, because it is a very valuable medicine that we need to make sure doctors are educated about.
Absolutely, and it's very key to go to your the candidates are having public forums around the state for the next 2 months or 64 days, whatever it is. Go to those events and ask them about cannabis, and ask them about supporting cannabis in hospice, which is what we're working on. I just sent the legislative council request paperwork in yesterday to the legislator, so hopefully today or tomorrow it'll get dropped in the legislative council, and we'll get going on trying to get cannabis in hospice for Oregonians.
Well, I'd appreciate our viewers supporting the work of Compassionate Oregon and Anthony Taylor. Thanks for watching us. Thanks for coming on, Anthony, and help restore hemp. Good night.
Absolutely. That's the motto of the day, restore hemp.